Greetings and salutations. Thank you for lending an ear to the Voice of the Times for Sunday, July 10, 2022. For today's editorial, lawmakers should consider bill for presidential libraries. Lawmakers should consider filing a bill creating a presidential library system like that in the United States. Actually, the term library seems inaccurate because those places are more like archives. And if this suggestion gains traction, the program might as well start with building one for former President Rodrigo Duterte. In the US, the presidential library system was started in 1939 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He wanted a place for his presidential papers, which he donated to the US federal government. Then in 1955, the US Congress passed the Presidential Libraries Act that created a system of libraries that were built with private funds but maintained by the government. The law encouraged other US presidents to donate their historical materials so that they can be preserved and made available to the public, including future historians. Once constructed, a presidential library, along with its records, is turned over to the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration. Regrettably, the Philippines has nothing exactly the same. There is a presidential museum and library in the Malacanang Palace complex that has memorabilia, artworks, and other relics related to past Philippine leaders. But as mentioned earlier, the idea proposed here is more like an archive for presidential papers and other historical records. The Philippines does have the National Archives, but its records are not exclusive to presidents. Part of its materials are records from local governments, as well as from constitutional offices, government corporations, state universities, and Philippine embassies and consulates. Those records are inconvenient to access, and most Filipinos are probably unaware where that agency is even located. Perhaps the closest match is a virtual library built by Fidel V. Ramos, the 12th Philippine president. The website is a repository for thousands of videotapes, documents, and photos. Earlier in 2018, a House bill was filed to construct the FVR Library and Museum, but obviously the idea failed to take off. The bill's proponent wanted to build a place where future generations can learn about Mr. Ramos. Something similar should be done for all former presidents. That resource might help Filipinos, particularly students, appreciate the country's former leaders, many of whom had remarkable and inspiring life stories. For instance, Bohol is famous today for the Chocolate Hills, but not as the home province of the late President Carlos P. Garcia, who was known for his Filipino First policy, and those who lament about national leaders coming mostly from affluent families might be inspired by the life of Ramon Magsaysay, who was a chauffeur earlier in life and was a gifted mechanic. There is also Diosdado Macapagal. He was known as the poor boy from Lubao, a reference to his modest roots in Pampanga. He was a bright and industrious student who was catapulted to national prominence after topping the 1936 bar exams. Biographies and other books about them and other former presidents are difficult to find. There are even fewer films or documentaries made about them that might be useful or relevant for young audiences. As mentioned before, history is likely to be favorable to the country's 16th president, Mr. Duterte. To be certain, his presidential records should be preserved and accessible to the public. In the US, the presidential records are accessible through its Freedom of Information Act 5 years after the end of every administration. Later on, it might be useful to know more about the Duterte administration's initiatives to negotiate a peace deal with communist insurgents. Also in the future, people might want to know about his diplomatic efforts regarding China or about the controversial war on drugs. It makes sense to start with Mr. Duterte since he just left office. His official papers likely are still intact somewhere. Years from now, those materials might inspire biographies, other books, and perhaps feature films and documentaries. And like in the US, the Duterte Presidential Library imagined here can even host events like symposia and lectures about the issues of the day related to a past president. Hopefully, lawmakers will consider the suggestion made here. Successfully navigating the future sometimes requires learning from the past. And that's the editorial for Sunday, July 10, 2022. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to its digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and listen to the Voice of the Times.
Our longest trusted English newspaper since 1898. Now available digitally. Computer. Order the Manila Times digital edition. Subscribed. Get the Manila Times Digital Edition for less than 2 pesos and 50 centavos per day when you sign up for 1 year. The Manila Times, news source of choice, trusted since 1898.